headlines at 3 p.m. The decision to extend the national state of disaster to the 15th of April has been slammed by some. This as government says there are still measures that need to be implemented before it can be lifted. The Ukraine-Russia conflict is being debated in Parliament today. In Ukraine, a curfew in Kyiv as the city comes under further attack while efforts to get people out of Sumy and aid into Mariupol continue. We're coming to you live from Auckland Park here in Johannesburg. This is SABC News, DSTV channel 404, and you tuned into SA Today with me, your host, Flo Ladwaba. Let's, of course, talk to you about that live debate that was in our headlines. The National Assembly this afternoon holding a debate on the impact of the Russian invasion of Ukraine on South Africa. DA leader John Steenhuisen requested the debate. The DA has criticized the government's pro-Russia stance on the war. Let's take you there live to that debate now.
When diesel becomes so expensive that Eskom can no longer burn its turbines, and when the lights go out, they stay out, this will be our war too. When the spiraling cost of importing and transporting food is passed on to consumers who already struggle to make ends meet and feed their families, and we see a large increase in malnutrition, this will be our war too. And when all of this food and insecurity and inflation results in a breakdown of law and order that will make last year's July riots look like child play, this will be our war too. We are already involved, and there is no such thing as a neutral position. As the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu famously said, when you choose the side of the oppressor in situations of, if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you've chosen the side of the oppressor. Countries that choose the wrong side of history will live with this tag for generations to come. It shouldn't be the hard thing to do, to put country ahead of party and to do the right thing. Honourable members, the ANC does not speak for South Africa on this, and it certainly doesn't speak for the DA. We condemn Russia's illegal invasion in the strongest terms, and we stand firmly with the people of Ukraine. And I urge President Ramaphosa to rethink the position of his government. Think of the plight of the Ukraine. Think of South Africa's place in the world, and think about what this war is going to mean for all of us as South Africans. Choose peace, condemn Russia. Thank you.
The lie. Of course, it's a lie.
Thank you. Honorable the Deputy Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Honorable Mashiko Dlamini.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. Greetings to our Chief Whip, ministers who are present here, honorable members. After the democratic election in 1994, South Africa ceased to be the parade of the world. It regained its rightful place in Africa, in the United Nations, and in the family of nations. We emerged as a democratic country into a fundamental transformed world. The development of South Africa's post-apartheid foreign policy is guided by the 7 principles, which are a belief in human rights which extend beyond the political, embracing the economy, social and environmental issues. A belief that just and lasting solution to the problem of humankind can only come through the promotion of democracy worldwide. A belief that justice and international law should guide the relations between the nations. A belief that international peace in the goal to which all nations should strive, where this breakdown, internationally agreed peace mechanism to solve conflict should be resorted to. A belief that our foreign policy should reflect the interests of the continent of Africa. a belief that South African economic development depend on growing regions and international economic cooperation in an independent world, a belief that our foreign relations must mirror our deep commitment, the consolidation of democratic South Africa. Deputy Speaker, South Africa's approach on the Russian-Ukraine matters has been based on the following key principle, which in turn are based on the foreign policy, to expressing deep concern at the violation of the UN Charter and international law, the loss of life, the humanitarian impact, and the forced displacement of people as a result of war in Ukraine. Recognizing the armed conflict would no doubt result in human suffering and destruction, the effect of which will not only affect Ukraine, but also reverberate across the world. No country is immune to the effect of this conflict. As the UN Secretary General has indicated, the conflict will have a huge impact on the global economy in a moment when we are emerging from COVID-19 pandemic, and so many developing countries absolutely need to have space for recovery. South Africa emphasizes respect to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of states. On the 9th of September 2021, BRICS leaders have expressed concern at the continuing conflict and violence in the different parts of the world. The BRICS leaders reaffirmed their commitment to the principle of non-interference in the internal affairs of states and reiterated that all conflicts must be resolved by peace means and through political and diplomatic effort in line with the international law, that is the UN Charter. Deputy Speaker, as a nation built through negotiation, South Africa is always appreciative of the potential dialogue has in averting a crisis and de-escalating conflict. In line with our strong commitment to the peace resolution of conflict, South Africa urges all parties to devote increased effort to diplomacy and to find a solution that will help avert further escalation. The door of diplomacy should never be closed even as conflict has broken out. South Africa urges all parties to approach the situation in a spirit of compromise, with all sides respecting international law. Peaceful resolution of the matters can
on a point of order.
by all parties in diplomatic effort.
Members,
Deputy Speaker.
respect the order.
Yeah.
No, can you please not do that? You are interrupting the speaker.
Yes.
It is irresponsible and it's not okay. Please finish your remarks, Madam.
Thank you, Honorable Deputy Speaker. South Africa urges all parties to approach the situation in a spirit of compromise, with all sides respecting international law. Peaceful resolution of matter can be achieved by all parties if diplomatic efforts to find a solution to the concern raised expressed by Russia resume. Currently, it is critical for all parties to uphold and protect human rights and abide by their obligation in terms of international law and international humanitarian law. South Africa continues to support and encourage regional initiatives such as the Minsk Agreement, and we welcome the work of the Normandy format, the Trilateral Contact Group, and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. South Africa supports the involvement of the good offices of the UN Secretary General, as it could also make a positive contribution in finding a lasting solution to this conflict. In the search of peace, South Africa supports the resolution process of inclusive talk led by the United Nations Security Council to address all the issues of concern to any of these parties. Deputy Speaker, noting that international action must create an environment conducive for diplomacy, dialogue, and mediation. Greater attention must be paid to bringing the sides closer to dialogue and not to take them further apart. The international community should support engagement between the parties in a spirit of compromise while de-escalating tensions, committing them to the cessation of hostilities and building trust and confidence. Ladies and gentlemen, members of parliament, as government of South Africa, we urge all South Africans not to take side on the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, as this could go against our principle. In addition, South Africa has a good bilateral relation in the both countries. I thank you.
Honorable members, honorable member, you are making noise there. You are out of order. Yes, I'm pointing out at you. You are disruptive, sir, and you've been repeating it. It is out of order. You want your members to be listened to, okay? So please behave, man. Just let your members speak because you want them listened to. You too. Otherwise, that's the best way to improve your argument, not by screaming. It's no argument screaming. Go ahead, Honorable Beckman, and appeal to them to listen to you.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. This did not start last month. I've been pushing Durko and the ministers before to take an active and productive opportunity in using their proximity to President Putin to try and persuade him first from occupying the Crimean Peninsula, then from building up military on the borders of Ukraine, and from handing out passports to create instability and friction as per the Georgian script a decade ago. I was not asking South Africa to take sides. I was rather tending them to clean their tarnished and embarrassing world image that has not shone since the Madiba Magic days. Having witnessed the ANC executive catch the ball, pass it, fumble it, and then throw it off sides, and then bench their minister who spoke sense, Durko, the once stable ship of foreign embarrassments, then ran on the field to join government, scoring an own goal at the UN General Assembly, took away our last ounce of credibility as defenders of any form of human rights, with our hypocritical but damagingly loyal excuse for a policy. A week before the Russian invasion, whilst no one believed Russia would unnecessarily invade Ukraine, embassies still proactively made evacuation plans for their citizens. Some of these included pre-evacuation emergency travel documents and emergency contacts. Contrast this to our embassy that abandoned passports and visas applications when taking themselves to safety. A group of us who had worked together under different Durko leadership in repatriating South Africans back during COVID, got together to immediately assist in the evacuation of around 200 South Africans, mainly students stranded in the war-torn areas of Ukraine. As the names were being put on the group, the ambassador put politics ahead of South Africa, threatening the group that if my name was not removed, he would remove himself. He then went on to treat the group admin volunteers like his own secretaries and only took the info but withheld crucial information that could assist. Furthermore, Durko WhatsApps would tell people to stay put. They would say that there is no war, that it is a military operation, and that they cannot get emergency travel documents because these are only issued in exceptional circumstances. Thankfully, the volunteers, headed by Lorraine Blow and Kim Kerr, continued to pull people over their borders thanks to the embassies, foreign embassies, and committed Durko heroes, and South Africans being South Africans. Durko boasts about their flights, but somehow did not know that people could fly testing positive once recovered from COVID-19. So they still ended up having to assist there too, and with the ones that Durko still referred to them. The situation could be helped immediately if stranded Ukrainians with families in South Africa had a visa-free right of passage for at least 6 months. reviewed annually, and if we instructed our embassies in surrounding countries to assist our citizens with emergency travel documents to travel home, come on, ministers, save face, put your people first and put principle above loyalty. This is war. It does affect South Africa, and your voice must protect our pockets. Thank you.
Honorable Shivambo. Honorable Shivambo.
No, thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. We state here on behalf of the anti-imperialist and anti-colonial economic emancipation movement that there is absolutely nothing wrong with the Russian Federation's preventing the military expansion of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, which is trying to expand its presence towards the borders of the Russian Federation, particularly because NATO is historically known for starting and engaging in neo-colonial and imperialist wars that are aimed at illegally removing government and enforcement of a so-called no-fly zone in Libya led to the killing of brother leader Muammar Gaddafi and was aimed at pillaging and stealing the gold reserve, currency reserve for the African continent. We will never forgive NATO for the killing of brother leader Muammar Gaddafi.
Honorable Shivambo, maybe you want to switch off your video to improve your bandwidth and so on. Do that. Your reception is pretty bad, yeah. Please go ahead. Honorable members, your job today is to listen, please. And this is your debate.
We will never forgive NATO for the killing of brother leader Muammar Gaddafi, and we will never forget that this war alliance of NATO destroyed Libya, which was one of the very few economically sovereign countries in the African continent. Now, South Africa's relationship with the Russian Federation is rooted in true bonds of libertarian brotherhood. At the core of the Soviet Union was the Russian Federation, and anyone who argues otherwise is being dishonest. The USSR and Russia in particular dedicated military, political, and ideological resources in the struggle against colonialism and apartheid in South Africa. After the Sharpeville massacre on 21st of March 1960, the Soviet Union was among the first to cut all diplomatic relations with apartheid South Africa. It was essentially the Soviet Union working with the Cuban and Vietnam forces that provided military assistance in the Battle of Quito, the apartheid criminals to negotiate transition in South Africa. The Soviet Union and Russian Federation are not peacetime friends of South Africa, but true friends who must never be abandoned, irrespective of imperialist-sponsored master narratives about the military operations in Ukraine, which are essentially and emphatically aimed at preventing imperialist military expansion in Eastern Europe. South Africa is a member of the BRICS bloc of emerging economies, which essentially gives South Africa's economy access to a market of more than 3 billion people in the world and to more than 32% of the world economy. Our country must never distance itself from BRICS in favor of the erstwhile colonial and neo-colonial masters whose interests are ruthless exploitation of our natural resources. South Africa must not cut its economic relations with the Russian Federation and must instead deepen, broaden, and strengthen our economic, social, and political relations with the Russian Federation, and of course with all BRIC countries. The Russian Federation, like all BRIC countries of Brazil, China, and India, have no colonial and they've got no neo-colonial aspirations, but are instead committed to global peace, stability, and collective prosperity. In the immediate, The South African Health Products Regulatory Authority, SAPRA, must authorize Sputnik V vaccines, and all other relationships must be strengthened so that we have got access to Sputnik V vaccines here in South Africa. And all parts of the progressive world must treat the West isolation of Russia as an opportunity to transition to a new world as an European imperialism and new colonialism. Now, in terms of the background, Chairperson, is that the outcomes of the Second World War was, one, the formation of the United Nations, but the colonial masters led by the US and the UK started a war alliance. NATO is the war alliance which is trying to expand its military bases towards Eastern Europe. The United States of America has currently more than 79 of those are in the African continent, including in Botswana, where we have the Africa Command Center. So there is absolutely nothing wrong with the military operations that are taking place in Ukraine to prevent the expansion of NATO, because we know of their sins and what they have done to destroy many parts of the world of overthrowing governments. We stand as the EFF to reaffirm that the relationship that has been built through blood and common purpose against colonialism and apartheid must be strengthened through properly defined and deepened economic relationships. We must never fall victim to NATO alliance as a peaceful alliance and any other person or any other national territory as a criminal alliance. We stand as the EFF to reaffirm that our relationship with Russia must never be discontinued. We should, on the contrary, strengthen that relationship because it is based on common prosperity and anti-imperialism. Thank you very much.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Honorable Sengwa.
Honorable members, the world finds itself yet again on the brink of economic collapse, hot on the heels of a 2-year-long COVID-19 crisis, which has altered the course of humanity. The socio-economic and socio-political climate is fragile, in need of recovery and newness. Add to this now the latest international crisis in the form of an unequivocally unnecessary invasion of Ukraine by Russia. It is fast escalating into an international humanitarian crisis on top of what the international community is already confronted with in various parts of the world as we grapple with COVID-19 and its after effects, notwithstanding ongoing wars, global terror, and displacement of people. Therefore, at the outset, we must call out Russia on its wrongness. The invasion of Ukraine and the current war is wrong and in total violation of every international statute and protocol in existence or imaginable. The basics are this. Ukraine is a sovereign state in the international community of nations. It has a right to determine its own national interest, and Russia has no right in law or in principle to impose itself on Ukraine in order to determine an agenda for Ukraine. Oppression, dictatorship, and repression must be rejected wherever they manifest themselves in the world. To be pro-Ukraine does not presuppose that one is anti-Russia, nor should being pro-Russia make one anti-Ukraine. Furthermore, those who are friends of Russia are dishonest friends and unworthy of the name if they fail to be frank and call Russia to order and denounce its war-centric attitude towards Ukraine. The hallmark of friendship is honesty and the ability to tell our friends when they are wrong. Thus, the South African government has failed dismally in its attempt to be a voice of reason, freedom, and democracy when it chooses to be half pregnant, being neither fish nor fowl on this glaring violation of human rights and international protocols. Neutrality in a war advances the agenda of the aggressor, in this case, Russia. Russia's own reservations about NATO notwithstanding, it must understand that you don't start a war to prevent a war. Therefore, we must reject the invasion and the war, and Russia must pull out of Ukraine. The United Nations must appoint a special envoy as a matter of urgency to mediate the situation, provided Russia pulls out of Ukraine, and defense, military, and humanitarian assistance must be afforded to Ukraine. Europe must itself be called out for its racism in how it has handled the refugee crisis flowing out of Ukraine. The blatant discrimination towards African and Black nationals has called into serious question the bona fides of the human rights assistance and humanitarian assistance being meted out. Racism must be rejected, especially in a war. If we are committed to justice and democracy, then we must reject this irrational, erratic, and egotistic Putin paranoia-driven war, as we equally reject the one China policy, which oppresses the Taiwanese and Tibetan people, and we must hold true to the principle of a two-state solution in the Israeli-Palestine conflict and reject any human rights violations on both sides. Honorable Deputy Speaker, we must be unwavering in our efforts towards global peace and accept that peace is an act of humanity, not ideology. The loss of life anyway is a loss for humanity, not ideology. Any ideological or political discourse that thrives on and results in war, loss of life, and violence must be rejected, and every effort must be made to bring about peace. The international community must uphold the sovereignty of each state to determine its own suffrage. In conclusion, the international community does not need another war or a distraction. We need global efforts towards economic recovery, development, and growth, and to push back on the frontiers of global poverty, inequality, and unemployment. The Putin madness is an unnecessary
Honorable Member, now your time has expired.
Obligation, and therefore
Honorable
this with the strongest possible terms and continue.
Honorable Member, your time has expired. Don't stretch it. Honorable Groenewald.
Geachte adjunct speaker, there must be no doubt that each and every person in South Africa is affected by the war in Ukraine. The subject for discussion this day is what is the economic influence and effect in South Africa in terms of the war in the Ukraine. And why do I say that each and every person is affected by that? It is because you have to eat to live. If you go and look what the statistics reveal, we will find and see that 30% of the wheat consumption in South Africa is imported from the Ukraine. That means, and that is the projection, that since 24th of January, if you project it over a year to year, wheat prices will increase with 27%. White maize will increase with 20%. Yellow maize with 21%. That is then no wonder that certain bakeries already announced that there will be a sharp increase in the price of bread because of the war in the Ukraine. And to get to a situation where you think that it doesn't influence you as a citizen or as a person in South Africa because it's far away, then you are misleading yourself. And then I didn't even talk about the influence of fuel prices, the agricultural sector, fertilizers. So in the next season, where farmers are preparing for wheat to plant, they're going to pay a dear price because of this war in Ukraine. And then, Honorable Deputy Speaker, I want to say to the ANC that if you think that just because of the support in your struggle days, that you have to look and be in favor of your friend, I want to say to you, you are failing the people of South Africa. A true friend will appreciate sharp criticism if they deserve it. And I think the ANC must ask itself, in the fact that they don't want to condemn in strong terms the war in the Ukraine, the fact that they did not support the resolution of the United Nations. How does Russia see you? Do they see you as a friend or as a useful idiot? That is the fact. En ek wil dit baie duidelik stel. Daar moet geen onduidelikheid wees nie. As 'n land sy tanks en sy troepe instuur in 'n ander land, dan is jy die aggressor. Maak nie saak wat se argumente jy wil gebruik om te sê dat jy dit gedoen het nie. Daar is geen regverdiging nie. En daarom sê die Vryheidsfront Plus dat die inval van Rusland in die Oekraïne moet ten sterkste veroordeel word. And I said it before, the real victims of war are the women and the children, and we see that. I thank you.
Point of order, Speaker.
Yes, what's the point of order?
Yes, Honorable Deputy Speaker, I wanted to raise point of order on the member on the podium because he's misleading the House. He says that only Ukraine supplies 30% of wheat. It's not true. It's both Russia and Ukraine. He must not mislead the House.
Honorable member, that's not a point of order. That's a debating point. Ndadem Rudy.
The ACDP was one of the first parties that called on Russia to withdraw their forces from Ukraine so that dialogue, negotiations, and diplomacy can take place free from violence. Russia's invasion of Ukraine we are debating today is very unfortunate and should not have happened. The stubbornness of political leaders who negotiate in bad faith has resulted in what potentially might descend into Third World War, given that Russia has reportedly requested military and technical assistance from China, while the US, on the other hand, has warned China of serious consequences if she gives assistance to Russia. This is a clear indication that the Russia-Ukraine conflict is not an easy matter that can be resolved by just condemning one side against the other. King Solomon once said, and I quote, "The first one to plead his case seems right until another comes and cross-examines him," close quote. This simply means that we must listen to both sides of the story in any conflict before we pass judgment, which would be skewed and might even exonerate the guilty party. The ACDP does not agree with President Ramaphosa's approach to the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. According to media reports, President Ramaphosa has discussed the conflict with Russian President Vladimir Putin, but has not discussed the same conflict with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. The ACDP would like to know why President Ramaphosa is not calling President Zelensky just as he called President Putin. He should prevail on both leaders to allow mediation process to end this conflict that is affecting South Africa's economy directly. What affects Ukraine affects Europe, Africa, and the rest of the world. The economies of emerging markets like South Africa are badly hit hard. Rolling blackouts, the legacy of COVID lockdowns, corruption, and poor service delivery have put South Africa in a worse financial position than the one we faced during the global meltdown of 2008. Investor chief economist is also concerned and is saying that the war between Russia and Ukraine, coupled with continued load shedding and the slow implementation of structural reforms, could cause South Africa's economic growth 0.2% this year. Honorable members, the ACDP repeats its call on Russia and Ukraine to allow peaceful mediation to take place because we are affected negatively by this war. We want peace and not war. And I call on our members to allow both sides and encourage both sides to meet and negotiate rather than stand on grandstands and condemn one against the other. Thank you.
Thank you.
Honorable Deputy Speaker and honorable members, the tension between the NATO countries and Russia is well documented. What the recent invasion of Ukraine has exposed is that the United Nations has become a mere talk shop and is a toothless body with no leadership. Nothing stopped the UN leadership to have met with two parties to resolve the situation before it escalated to war. The UN has failed the Ukrainian people and the Russians who are not in favor of this incursion. Many countries struggle with the challenge of refugees. And even here in South Africa, we find displaced Africans from war-ravaged countries. None of these countries find real support from the UN in terms of housing millions of refugees, never mind feeding them. South Africa and other member states pump membership monies into the UN, but it seems to be funding the bureaucrats in New York. And that money does not benefit the member states in other ways. Finally, South Africa is a shining example of negotiating to resolve conflict. And we have replicated that recipe for other conflict scenarios. The UN could learn a few tricks from our example. However, use of force in order to achieve a political objective must be condemned in the strongest terms. Finally, we need to agree as South Africans on what is our national interest out there. Otherwise, we will be victims of these superpowers. Ayikho kaloku into yoba ngokusizoba ngoFather Christmas. Uxa kukhona i-conflict, ubizwe thina sithumela amajoni ethu phaa awufa kwezi ndawo. But xa kufuneka ngoku kuthiwe make sinikwe ke si-investe kwezo ndawo, ufumanisa uba ngoku ngena kwayezi superpowers. Iyadika le nto mali, make sibe siyixoxe le national interest.
ATM. Is the ATM present? Good, Honorable Hiron.
Deputy Speaker, the global economic impact of Russia's invasion of Ukraine has been described by the President of the World Bank as catastrophic. It is a crushing blow to South Africa. We were depending on a resurgent global economy to mitigate the disaster of state capture and to stimulate post-pandemic recovery. We desperately need this recovery. Millions of unemployed South Africans will remain trapped in poverty for as long as our economy fails to grow by at least 3% per annum. Rising commodity prices may well be an outcome of this war and may advantage some sectors of our economy, but equally rising oil prices will be disastrous. Before Putin's invasion, we were predicting our economy would grow by 1.8% this year. But oil prices, which have already doubled in the last 6 months, could trim a full percentage point off this projected growth, which is a devastating setback. But what can we do about it? President Ramaphosa recently indicated that in a course of a discussion with his Russian counterpart, the subject of South Africa playing a role as a mediator was raised. And this is an important development. When South Africa joined BRICS, it was said that although our economy dwarfed those of our BRICS partners, our experience of managing our transformation from apartheid to democracy was of immense global value. This unique capital has already enabled South Africa to contribute to settling conflicts on the other side of the world. In this regard, we can think of our role in advancing peace in Northern Ireland and brokering the Lockerbie deal. The President was himself involved in peace negotiations in Northern Ireland in the late 1990s, and we can draw important lessons from the leadership of President Mandela at this time. When South Africa was approached to mediate in the Northern Ireland conflict, former President Mandela reportedly said that our country does not intervene in the conflict in another country without being invited to do so. Mandela apparently required written requests from all the parties involved. We agree with government that the situation in Ukraine demands negotiation and compromise. We know that President Ramaphosa has spoken to President Putin, but has he also spoken to the Ukraine President Zelensky? Lesson number 2 from the Northern Ireland mediation efforts was Madiba's unequivocal insistence on a ceasefire. Applying this right now means that Russia must withdraw her troops. Deputy Speaker, we stand unequivocally for mediation and peace. We have a roadmap that we have followed once before. Are we willing to use it again? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Honorable Sheikh Imam.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Let me start off by saying any casualties in a war are the people themselves. And the National Freedom Party is of the view that a negotiated settlement would go a long way in preventing the loss of lives. But the question I want to ask today, Honorable Deputy Speaker, is this. When the people in Palestine are losing their lives, being raped and murdered, there's no cry from anybody, no passion. When the same thing happens in Syria, we hear nothing. When the same thing happens in Libya, we hear nothing. When the same thing happens in Iraq, we hear nothing. When the Ukrainians are violating the rights of other Ukrainians, particularly in the Donbass region, there's nobody crying for those people. What is the reason for that? What about India? Why is there nobody in this country raising the concerns of the Indian minorities, of the Christians and the Muslims whose rights are being violated by the Indian government? Nobody in this country is saying anything about it. Now, NATO went on and bombed many of the Russian allies. Russia could do absolutely nothing about it and stayed out of it. What did Russia say? Demilitarization. Stay away from my Russian borders. If you notice what has been happening since 1990, they are coming closer and closer and closer to the Russian border until they will make Russia so weak that Russia will have no other option but to give in to them. That is what it is all about. But who is the root cause of this whole problem? It is clearly the West and the United States of America that is the root cause of all the mayhem and chaos and destruction all over the world. Let's talk about the biological laboratories which is funded by the Pentagon in Ukraine. Where is it coming from? Why are they getting involved in those? Let's talk about the number of people that were massacred by the Ukrainians who have been detained without trial. Nobody has said anything about that as well. Okay, let's talk about the shelling of the hospitals and the schools and the massacre and the mass graves that were found in Ukraine. Nobody says anything about that. Now, what is Russia asking for? Russia is saying, stay away from my borders and stay away from me. All you have been doing, and remember, Ukraine is being used as a fool by the United States and the West, and they're falling into the trap like many other countries have fallen in the trap previously.
All right, that's the National Assembly then holding a debate on the impact of Russian invasion on Ukraine. Let's hear from Russia indeed, as the Russian ambassador to the UN, Vasily Nebenzia, is briefing the media at the moment. We take you live there now.